Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Welcome back, Rockstars. We have a really exciting guest today, so I know you're going to love this episode. Charly Kevers is the CFO of Carta. Carta, through a connected ecosystem of tools, links together the key players in private equity and venture, from investors and LPs to their portfolio companies. Charly, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be on.
Will admit I wasn't terribly familiar with your company before we met, and I probably oversimplified things, but you want to expand a little bit on what Carta's mission is?
Absolutely, happy to. So what Carta started effectively helping private companies manage their ownership. So think of it as digitizing stock certificates and enabling CFOs and founders to manage this through software, and then build a full platform that helps anything related to equity ownership. So think valuations, think financial reporting, compliance, everything that helps you as a private company to do that. And then in the last few years, we've extended that to help the investors that invest in those companies. So through this connected platform that you described, now helping the funds themselves to manage their back office and connect to the information for coming from their portfolio companies, and then helping them then report to the LPs investing in those funds. And what this means is for the funds, we've effectively created a purpose-built general ledger that effectively helps these CFOs at funds to manage their back office, do the valuations, taxes, capture the information from the portfolio companies. So again, a full platform that helps them in the private capital. And the really important word that you use, Jack, is networked. And that's really the main difference compared to a lot of software companies you've probably talked through, is just the fact that all of this is connected on one platform. So what happens at the portfolio companies can be seen by the fund and can be seen by the LPs, assuming everybody's okay with that information going through. But that's kind of the big piece that makes us different.
Now, fascinating company. It's always great for me, as a former CFO, when my guest works for a company that is a product that I would be inclined to use. So no, that's terrific. But I definitely want to explore that a little bit. Before we do, I'd love to chat about your own background a little bit. And you are from Belgium.
I am from Belgium, yes.
Yeah, and you are, to the best of my memory, and I'm almost 100% sure that you are our first guest from Belgium. So thanks for making a milestone happen. But what was it like growing up in Belgium?
I loved it. I still love going back. I grew up in Belgium and France, so both are kind of home for me now. Like I tend to my family is now in Paris, so I tend to go back to Paris more often than Brussels. What I've always found interesting in growing up in Belgium is like we're not a very big country. Not that many of us in the world. The culture tends to be go and travel, go experience other countries, and then come back and basically explore other cultures to understand the world a bit more, versus other countries. France, for example, is a little more insular. They're very open-minded, but tend to be a little more self-centered. That was input in my early life, and then had a big impact on how I thought about my career and making sure I would work in different parts of the world to at least have that understanding before I chose to settle somewhere.
And how long have you been in the States?
Been in the States almost 18 years.
Okay, yeah. There's a bit of an accent there, but you've almost lost it completely. I had an uncle, he moved from Ireland. I think he moved in 1928 and he died in like the early 1990s, and he still had his accent. He used to joke, I've only been here 6 decades, give me a chance. So, but
there's definitely, I'm trying the best I can, but there are definitely a few words and sentences where my accent will come up for sure.
Well, if we talk long enough, I think my accent's probably going to grate on people more than yours. Yours is at least a pleasant accent. So you out of high school, you got your degree from ESC Business School, and you have an MBA from INSEAD. And so tell me, what about you, the young Charly, made that an attractive educational path?
Happened to like numbers, like I think a lot of finance people found that out early enough, and just was interested in kind of the business side of things. Hence why I went to the business school route. My family is not in the finance world, so kind of the first one going down that path. ESCP that happened to be one of the older schools in France, and kind of one of the better ones. And so, obviously, trying to go to the best school possible. It's a great school to operate in France, in Europe, not as well known outside of Europe, and at the time outside of France. Hence why then business school for me made sense to try to open up more opportunities to go work in other parts of the world and experience other opportunities.
It's in, you said one of the oldest, but I believe I read somewhere along the way that it wasn't the first, but it's the oldest that's still around.
It's definitely one of the old. I'll double check now, but you're right. I think it is one of the oldest.
I think it's older than this country. Is that possible? It would be like the early 1700s. So
I thought it was late 1700s, so it's probably similar age to the U.S. But yes, it's an old.
How about that? So that's cool. So when you were in Belgium, did young people typically work while they were students? And if so, what was your first job?
Oh, I was too young to work when I was in Belgium. I moved to France when I was a teenager. So my very first job was just delivering papers overnight to people in the neighborhood. But otherwise, we do a lot of internships in Europe, and so I had before actually holding a real job after college. I've been doing an internship both in audit at Arthur Andersen when it still existed, and in consulting. And that gave me a quick understanding that audit wasn't for me. I loved the experience. I learned a ton. Didn't want to do that for a living. So that's why I went the consulting route when I finished my undergrad degree.
Yeah, you and I are the same. I was with a firm. It's now KPMG. It was Pete Marwick and Mitchell at the time. And I loved auditing. The people were great. It's not like it was interesting work. And I learned a ton in 3 years. But I also, one of the things I learned is I didn't want to do it. But assuming your first job was a paper boy, because a couple of months ago I was talking to my nieces and nephews and mentioned that I was a paper boy. And they didn't actually know what the concept was. We call them paper boys. And
no, it's exactly what it was. Yes, actually, I have 2 sons, and we're starting to talk about, like summer jobs and these types of things. And they asked me, what was your first summer job? And I explained, and they were like, what do you mean delivering the paper? Because yes, they haven't seen a newspaper in a long time. So
what's a newspaper? Why would anyone need to deliver it? So, but I remember getting up, and Sunday mornings in Boston, the paper was like that thick. It just, I was a skinny little 11-year-old. So, so cool. But anyway, I want to talk about your career, Kath, because I think it's really been, you had a remarkable journey. And, working in corporate development, investor relations with, some of, I think it's fair to say some iconic companies like Lending Club, Salesforce, and HP. But tell me a little about how all of these roles kind of came together to prepare you for what ended up being your first CFO type job.
Yeah, interestingly, I think every job I've had from the first one out of college to now all contributed to what I think has made me decently prepared to take the CFO role. And so consulting and investment banking, the first two, really kind of great foundation in terms of just how do you break down problems, how do you quickly ramp up on something new, how do you tell a narrative, how do you present things. And so that very formative years, I really enjoyed it. I, at some point, got tired of just being the person giving the advice and not doing anything. So as many folks in those situations started to wanting to get closer to the operations, corporate development. Interestingly, it was less, the learnings there were less about finance because the numbers is the easy part in M&A from my perspective. But it gave me a much better appreciation for all the little things that operationally have to go right for these acquisitions and these transactions to be successful. And the most important one being the people. And I had no appreciation for that as a banker. But then as you get in the role of, I need to support this new team coming in, make them successful, the people side of it is frankly 80% of where the deal value gets created. And that absolutely gave me a completely different perspective on how to approach just growing a business and scaling something. And then investor relations, probably the most impactful part of my journey. I did not plan that at all. It was one of those, hey, you should try this and it's a good experience. And I took the risk and learned a lot about how to communicate, how to interact with investors, of course, especially large public investors, not just private ones. And I did it during a period of change, I would say. It was 4 different CEOs in 2 years at HP when I did that. So you can imagine the types of discussions that would happen with external investors. That was quite interesting. So
Yeah,
high pressure, but high learning.
yeah, it's interesting because, it wasn't that long ago, like, 10 years ago. And I know a lot of CFOs, but I didn't know any that grew up through the investor relations type of thing like you did. And you spent some time there. But do you think it strikes me now is obvious that it's a good training ground for future CFOs. But do you think that's going to be something more and more that rather than, the control has always been the farm system for CFOs, but are we going to see more people from IR?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's a position where you obviously need to know how to communicate. That's table stakes, but also forces you to understand all the levers to a level of detail that you can then explain it in simple terms to investors. So it's not just the financials, of course, right? Investors start with what they can see, which is the financials, but always want to go behind it. And that's true of any finance professional, but I think in IR in particular, you need to be able to talk about the go-to-market motion and how people think about R&D and broadly the investments the companies do and the strategy and just connecting all that together. I think is critical to any CFO role and a great training ground to be able to communicate with investors, whether they're private or public. Slightly different mindsets, of course, and understanding those nuances, I think, is important. But I recommend it highly. But I wouldn't have done it if somebody I respected highly had not told me this is the thing you need to do to really train you for something that, frankly, others don't do. So it would also differentiate you as a finance professional, because I didn't come up the controller route, and at the time it was still a very important part of the skill set is, do you understand accounting? Can you close the books? And can you really be detailed on the technical aspects? This started to become more important. So yes, I do think you'll see more people coming from that route.
Yeah, when I talk to great CFOs, and look what I do for a living, right? So I talk to a fair amount of them, but a lot of them say the reason that they're successful as a CFO is because they have a great accountant or a great controller or a chief accounting officer working for them, and there's just each company, just what they need out of their CFO is different. So there's multiple paths to get there. But I want to chat a little about your path. You've just because of the companies you've worked for, and again some great ones. But undoubtedly, you've had the opportunity to work with some brilliant people and probably had some really influential mentors along the way. And I'd love to chat. Is there any, when you look back, it's like, wow, I learned a lot from that person?
I've been really lucky. Every experience I had people I would consider as mentors or really take the time to help me think through my career, what I could do to get better, to grow, to learn more. I think one of the most impactful ones was the person who was, when I was there at HP running all of strategy and corporate development. And that's the person who came to me and say, I think you should go try investor relations, which was at the time not an easy path to go, and definitely not something I was thinking about, not at all part of my career path. And he was extremely influential in terms of and he was an ex-CFO and kind of moved into more strategic roles and then eventually became a CEO of a company, but was really good about, pushing me in terms of, here are things you're not thinking about, but I know it stretches your limits, but this is how you're going to grow. This is how you're going to get better and learn more and learn from the best. And so he was very influential in my career at that critical point where start to build relationships that are important for long term, and also how to approach a business and how to think about it Yeah, he was really impactful.
Yeah, no, it sure sounds like it's so cool. Well, I'd love to chat with you about your experience with Carta, and you're coming up on 9 years, I believe. And so, looking back, what was it? It is true. This was your first official CFO role. Is that
Yep,
fair to
yep,
say?
it was.
So, what was it that attracted you to the opportunity? How did it come about?
I was at a stage of my career where, I was trying to think a little bit about how can I continue to stretch myself, and was looking, can I go make that jump to be the person leading a team, but also living in the Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, I'd never done like a small private company. As you can tell from the track, it was all large public companies. I learned a ton from a lot of really smart people. But it was the time where I thought, if I don't do it now, I likely won't do it. And so I was already looking for a smaller company. Got introduced to the founder of Carta, Henry, and just the moment he explained what he was working on, and the fact that it was a company building for finance professionals and generally solving finance problems, was really interesting. And I had experienced the challenge of broken cap tables as an M&A practitioner. So I had an appreciation for what he was solving by building software to solve these problems. And then when he described the broader vision he had, it was one of these, like, just, it makes sense. I would be excited to work on this, and whether it works or not, this is something I want to spend some time on, and this feels motivating. And then what was really interesting as I got into really seriously considering the job, I looked at the numbers, and because obviously, as any good finance person, I want to understand the metrics before I sign up for anything. And I don't think he understood how good the metrics were for the business where it was. So it was Series B, and the SaaS metrics were some of the best ones I'd ever seen. Having been at Salesforce and reviewing a lot of SaaS companies from an M&A perspective, they were really good. All the net retention, the growth, and kind of the underlying customer metrics were really, really strong. I don't think he understood how good they were. And so that, of course, also got me, a lot more comfortable with the risk I was taking. There was still a lot of unknowns, but all of this combined made a ton of sense at the time.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's fair to say that it's a very different company than the one you joined 9 years ago. And of course, just what people expect out of CFOs is different than it was 9 years ago.
Yeah, very
So
much so.
how is your role different than it was the first couple of years?
The first couple of years was all operational and frankly firefighting as the company was growing extremely fast. And yeah, it was finance, but it was everything else, right? It's just basically you play more of a business role, because the two most important roles at the time were R&D and sales, and everything else, was getting invested into, but it kind of is secondary. And so my first job was to implement NetSuite. I'd never done that, so figuring that out was interesting. Of course, getting the right accounting team in place was probably was the first thing I did, because I couldn't have done it without great accounts on the team. And so it was a lot of like, how do you think about the right operational structure to support the growth of the business and to support decision making and kind of understanding what's happening. That was the first couple of years, and now it's actually, we're a much more complex business. We're global. And so most of my time is spent on working with our executive team on, well, where do we allocate capital? What trade-offs do we make? And kind of tying all that to the strategy and spending a decent amount on strategy with our CEO. M&As, we're being lucky enough to be in a position where we can do M&A. So that's another area where I've spent more time in the last couple of years. Luckily, over the years, I've spent a decent amount of time raising capital. So that also, took a decent amount of time to do. We don't have to do that anymore, given we're now making money. But so it definitely, every stage of the company was different, and the needs were different. And so that's frankly what's been most exciting, is I don't feel like I've had the same job over the last 8 to 9 years. It's really become a different job every year.
Yeah, that's great, right? I mean, there's some statistic, I forget what firm it was, that CFOs change jobs every 3 years or so. It sounds like you change jobs almost more frequently than that. It just happens to be in the same company.
That's what it feels like. Absolutely.
Yeah, but you mentioned capital allocation. You also mentioned, the relatively recent product evolution you've had expanding to the VC PE funds. And, it's affiliated, but it is kind of a new product roadmap there. So how do but fundamentally, you're still a financial guy, right? So how do you balance kind of the long-term growth plan? Hey, we're going to do this. It's in our long-term best interest, but the need to always be innovating and diversifying the products with fiscal prudence, which is a nice way of saying you're probably cheap, Charlie.
I am. I think that's just like that comes with the interest in numbers and finance in general. A lot of it for us, it's really the collaboration between our CEO and myself. There's always, I think that for us, that healthy tension where he's always thinking 2 to 3 years out. He's actually generally not too worried about this quarter, next quarter. He'll want to know where we are and how the pipeline is evolving and all these things, of course. But his mind is always 2 to 3 years out, which means he's always thinking about what are the investments that we need to make to get to the specific roadmap items that he wants to reach, and really kind of he's then forcing me to kind of be able to lay that out with the rest of the executive team, and then the way we've made that work for us is by setting kind of a 3-year plan is generally how we operate. It's very difficult in the software space to go beyond 3. And everybody would like to do 5 to 10, but I don't think it's super realistic. So we have that as the starting point, grounded in the strategy, of course. And then on an annual basis, to not have to kind of debate every year what the budget should be in kind of short term versus long term, because we've got a clear alignment across everyone on kind of what the financial profile should look like over the next 2-3 years, then we can set very clear constraints for every year. And so when we're starting to work on 26 right now, I already know roughly kind of what the shape of the P&L should look like, which means we don't have to greatly debate, here's how much capital we have to allocate. The biggest debate is more where's the pot of money getting distributed, not how big the pot of money is. And that's made it much easier for us to operate because that is well established in how we operate. And then the debate is more, where do we put it versus just, should we spend more or less?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Essentially, because you anticipated my next question, perhaps, or at least a next question. But one of the things I get asked a lot by the members is about the relationship between the CFO and the CEO. And, I've made the observation and, people said, yeah, now that you say it, that's right. But the CFOs for a long time have been saying the CEO is their most important partner in their business life. And it made sense. But the CEOs didn't always reciprocate that. And they didn't even often reciprocate it. But I'd say in the last few years, and I don't know if it's the post-COVID world, things have changed or not, but CEOs are now identifying their CFO as their most important business partner too, which must be great. So I'm curious to get your perspective on it, how your CEO is Henry Ward. So, how you build that kind of partnership with him. And the other twist on it, Henry's one of the founders of the company too, which puts some other dynamics in play as well, I suspect.
Founders are a different breed for sure. I've learned a ton. I mean, if I think about the folks who have really pushed me and made me better, he's one of those people because he is extremely curious, which means he wants to understand everything. Which means if you say, here's how we're going to report and here's how a gap works, he'll ask questions, which means it forces me and my team to have very clear and thoughtful answers. And it can be, well, because this company does this, right? When you were just doing the same thing. And so from that standpoint, it's made for a really productive relationship in terms of him showing a lot of interest. And then it all comes down, as I'm sure many of your guests have mentioned, just the trust and transparency between the two roles, right? I feel like I can say what's truly on my mind, and he, of course, has no worries telling me what he thinks. Mm-hmm. But it is really a two-way street. I think from day one, I've always felt like my voice was heard, and that to me is really critical, right? If I'm not in a position as someone who's supposed to tell the truth, and I feel strongly that it's my job is to tell everyone from our team to the board, here's what's happening, here's what it means, and here's what we're going to do about it. And he's always allowed me to do that, and actually shown a lot of interest in understanding kind of the financial perspective, and then he's over time built his own perspective on what he wants the financial shape of the business to be. But that respect and transparency has been key.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and you are right. The founder CEOs, they just have a little different perspective on things, and I say that as one, so I can I can tell those jokes, I think, and get away with it a little bit. But the other thing that I think is intriguing about your role within the company, not only the relationship with the CEO, but if I were on your company's product development side, or certainly on your marketing side, I would be going to you all the time for any innovations in the company, in the product roadmap. And I'm just kind of curious, are you involved in Carta's product roadmap? And, do they seek you out? And, do you sort of a guinea pig to an extent?
We're definitely a guinea pig. We've tried a lot of features. It's my team broadly, and not just myself, of course, because some of the more detailed and technical features, my accounting team, for example, will be quite involved. So yeah, we've tried a lot of things. I don't know that they always love me having input on it, because I can be pretty annoying on how I would like things to work. But that's what parts of what makes the job really interesting is I get to talk to the folks who are building the product and understand how they're thinking about it, what other customers are saying, what we're saying. And so, yes, we spend a good amount of time, and especially when they have to do with feature supporting companies, private companies. We use all of them, as you can imagine, and always have a lot of feedback as well for our team. So there's constant back and forth between our teams. And I think it also actually makes life really more interesting for my finance team, is because they get to engage with the product. They get to engage with the R&D teams and see their process and see how they're building and how they're making decisions on what to build, what not to build. And so I think it's also made for a more engaging experience for the finance team.
Yeah, it's interesting. They get annoyed with you. That's like the people, those pesky customers, right?
Yes.
What a great company we'd have if the customers would just keep their opinions to themselves. So.
It would be so much easier, but not very interesting. I think it's the other thing that it's allowed me to do, being at a company where we serve, in many cases, CFOs and finance professionals, is that I'm more involved in talking to customers and going to events and hearing their thoughts, partly because there's just a bit of like, oh, well, you're a CFO, you get the types of challenges, right? You, from a risk management standpoint, the complexity that we all deal with, the compliance requirements, everything that is kind of making the job complex. And that's been tremendously helpful for me as well, because I feel like I've been able to build my own perspective on what customers are saying and not just having to rely on what the teams are saying. I get to talk to folks directly and hear their pain points, what they like, what they don't like. And that's just really, really useful input in everything we do.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can sort of be there to translate, right? So what's the CFO talking about? And you can help a little bit. So
definitely had many of these discussions where I'm like, no, what they really mean is this.
Yeah. So it's cool that you have the opportunity to be involved in the sales and marketing type of process. But so, every company, and, you're not a gap CFO, you didn't come up through, although you were in public accounting, you're not like a controller who became a CFO. So I'm guessing you communicate as you should through KPIs and other metrics. And I'm just curious, what are some of your personal favorites to assess business performance?
I'm always trying to think of what are the few things that are as simple as possible that everybody can rely around. Growth is an obvious one. The one I particularly like is net dollar retention, just because it encompasses so many things and so many parts of the business impact that. It's one number, but yet it's a reflection of how happy our customers are, how good we are at building new things. It's just, so that's one KPI we spend a good amount of time on, and we communicate broadly to the whole company by different parts of the business. And then looking at certain metrics on efficiency, and so magic number, rule of 40, these types of things. Again, trying to keep it relatively simple, but also being able to quickly point to everyone, here's why this matters, and here's how everything connects together.
No, that's amazing. So that you're able to use those KPIs so effectively. So, one thing I want to ask you about, though, is, because it's maybe the critical issue of our time, is how are CFOs using generative AI in their roles? And, there's still, we've been at it a couple of years, there's still a little bit of caution and uncertainty. And, what advice can you give people to embrace this, truly a game-changing technology.
Yeah, and it feels like it's changing every week, so it's tough to keep up with everything that's happening. Well, for us, it's a bit unique because we're building that into the product. We have built it into the product. So part of what our team is doing is also very interesting to me because we're solving accounting problems, for example. So on the fund side, for example, we're helping with cash reconciliations and building agents that can do that. It's always very interesting to me and how then it applies back to our team. So we're testing a few of the things our product team is releasing. Similarly, we've done a lot around ingesting legal documents and kind of making that information easily translated into the software. There's some use cases that make sense for the broader kind of G&A teams at Carta. But talking about finance specifically, the way we're approaching it, and I strongly suggest that a lot of folks consider that, we're actually, every team that reports to me is identifying at least one use case a quarter that they need to automate with AI. And it can be really small to start with, but I'm basically being pretty annoying with my teams, and I want everybody to use it. I want everybody to get at this stage an understanding of what's possible with it, and at least test how it can help their jobs. And of course, it's looking at all the high volume tasks, very manual tasks, all the obvious components that you can manage. We start to, I mean, on the accounting side, we've already done for a few years using that for accounting memos and kind of drafting a lot of the technical documentation. That's already helped a good amount. The team is piloting some recons that are still manual and kind of using LLMs to do that. It's still a testing phase, but starting to see some promising progress. My strategic finance team is using it to do variance analysis and also draft commentary to many of our presentations, to at least have, based on all the information, here's the commentary, and kind of just go tweak it versus starting from zero. And then most recently, we did something interesting is in an M&A process, we actually used it to feed a lot of the information we got from the target to identify what are the areas we should dig into, what are the areas of risk that based on everything you see and everything you know about Carta, you would advise us to go look at. It was surprisingly good. And we were able to run some analysis based on some of the finance data that we got. So we're basically across the board trying as many things as we can to identify ways to just get more efficient, get smarter, faster, so we can spend all our time on more complex analysis.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's the internet, I figured, was probably the biggest change in professional lives that I would experience, and I think Gen AI is probably going to be bigger when all is said and done in terms of the impact on how we work and how we live. So, but aside from the technology changes, which are just astounding, how do you see the role of financial leadership and the CFO role specifically evolving in the years to come?
I mean, it's already, as you pointed, changed a decent amount from I'd say the last decade. To me, the pressure of understanding the operational dynamics of all functions in the business will only increase. Meaning, of course, we're the finance folks, we need to understand the numbers, but being able to thoughtfully engage in a discussion and go to market and understanding just the behavior of the funnel, the conversion rates, and how to think about the pipe and the activities on the marketing and sales side that impact that, and being able to engage with the CRO and CMO.
Yeah, it's amazing to live in the era that we live in, with technology just constantly evolving. And aside from those types of changes, how do you see the nature of financial leadership and the CFO role in particular evolving in the years ahead?
Yeah, I think one thing that's already changed a lot, and I think the pressure is only growing, is in my view, for finance professionals to really understand the operations of many other parts of the company, right? And for example, in go-to-market, being able to engage with the CMO and CRO on how their pipeline behaves and which investments in top, middle, and bottom of the funnel will really maximize growth, and being able to be an active participant in those discussions and not just receiving the input, reflecting the numbers, and then moving on. Similarly on R&D, what does it mean to deploy new technologies, and how does it impact the speed of developments, where we invest, and just so that broader pressure on you need to understand in more depth operationally and be more of a COO really in terms of your ability to engage with everyone else, I think that's only going to continue to grow. I think the pressure is on just communication. Again, this is, I think, a topic you've talked a lot with many of your guests, and I'm very much on the same page, is the requirements to be an effective communicator, to be able to take very complex topics and make them simple for the employees, for your peers, for the board, for investors, is only going to become more important, especially in a world where change is even faster, change is constant. Just being able to quickly get to a key message, I think is critical, and that's not necessarily something that was true 10 years ago. Certainly through my career, I've seen that change, and I think it's only accelerating. Those are the big ones. And then on technology, beyond Gen AI, I think just the CFO also has to be much more informed on how to think about systems and how to put a system architecture together, not just on the finance side, but be able to engage with all the other functions, with a CIO, and kind of basically it's the systems, but maybe even more importantly, the data infrastructure and what that means in terms of your ability to then leverage AI and other pieces of technology that give you a sense of how the business is functioning. That is something I absolutely underestimated, is how much time I would spend on just the broader technology infrastructure. Even before AI was something we all have to leverage, that was a much bigger part of being a CFO than I anticipated. And I think that's, again, only going to become more important, is that you need to be a bit of a technologist now to be able to operate in this role, because you need to be able to engage in those topics to make sure you get the data that allows you to do your job.
No, I think that's a really insightful way of looking ahead to the future. But I want to ask you, just on a bit of a personal note, CFO for a rapidly growing company in the Silicon Valley. I suspect you're working quite a few hours, and yet I also suspect that you probably want to incorporate as much non-work things into your life. So how do you do that? What's your best path for achieving that work-life balance, which is so elusive to so many of us?
Yeah, I don't know if there's ever like a great balance. I'm lucky enough that I like what I do, and so it's never too difficult to focus on getting the job done. But to me, it really comes down to just being disciplined around keeping specific time to do the things I want to do outside of work. And for me, it's one aspect is staying healthy, and therefore that means like block enough time on my calendar. Is like I've got specific workouts that I'm not missing, and telling everybody, sorry, I'm not available at those times. Because otherwise, as any CFO knows, there's always something to work on. There's always a crisis or a problem to go help with. And so it just starts with just discipline with myself, but also with others, and being clear that, yes, I'm carving out these times that I'm not available. And I'm doing the same with, I have two boys, 9 and 14. And in the evening, I've got a very clear slot where this is family time. Unless it's super urgent, I'm generally not available. And it's being transparent around that. It's many times I've had to be available, not to say it works every time, but it's just being clear with everyone else on the things you want to prioritize.
Yeah, we can only do what we can do. But you mentioned earlier that in Belgium, small country, so they encourage everybody to travel and see the world. But do you have any fun trips coming up that you can share with the audience?
I just came back from Paris, visiting family and actually going to my business school reunion. My wife and I met at the same business school, so it was an easy decision to make to go back. And then we're lucky enough to be able to travel a decent amount. So every year we'll tend to go either to Asia. My wife is from Korea, so we'll generally go back there, and Japan and or Europe. So my son's getting plenty of visibility to different parts of the world, and so we've done the fun trip for the summer. Now we're back home.
You know where my fun trip was for the summer? New Hampshire, and I live in Massachusetts. So you're seeing a lot more of the world than I am. So good for you.
Beautiful. The U.S. is so large. There's so many beautiful places to see. That's what I enjoy about being here. Is been here, almost 18 years, and I feel like I'm still discovering so many parts of the U.S. that I didn't know that are absolutely beautiful. So I'm sure it's marvelous.
Yeah, it's such a big country, right? And it's California is so different from New England, and they're both different from Texas and Montana. So cool. But anyway, I think I always like to ask my guests if there's any advice for the next generation of CFOs that they'd like to pass on. Maybe people who are, not quite at that CFO level, but 6 months, 2 years from now, they could see themselves in the role. How should they be thinking about that?
To me, it starts with being curious. Like you ask a ton of questions of the folks you work for the folks you work with, your peers. Ask as many questions as you can. If you don't understand how something works, just ask. And that was something that was really pushed on me as a consultant, and that I've really tried to continue to do is just continue to learn. And that's the starting point, is being curious. That then to me translates into, well, how, as you want to grow in your career, how do you start anticipating what, the VP, the CFO, the board might ask? When you look at financial numbers, just trying to anticipate what are the questions, what are the follow-up questions. So it kind of pushes your thinking on, let me already anticipate these questions and therefore dig deeper in the problem, so I already know kind of 3 layers down all the details. And then the last one in my mind that we've talked about is communication. Like, practice communicating to different groups, different constituents, the information you're working on. And it can be a really small project. It doesn't have to be something big and complex, but you're really practicing being able to put together a narrative and explaining it, and just getting comfortable in different settings with folks who understand finance and folks who don't, to just get a good feel for your style and kind of really becoming comfortable in putting together a story with the numbers.
I think that is fantastic advice. And Charly, I know you have a lot going on these days, and probably in general. So really grateful that you're able to carve out some time to be with us today. And with that said, I'd just like to give you the final word.
Thank you. First, thank you so much for having me on. It was a really fun discussion, and I appreciate you showing so much interest in all of us CFOs. It's good that we're getting more visibility. And I'm really excited for all the changes that happen. And the only thing I'd say to everybody listening who's still earlier in their career is just say yes to the opportunities. Take a little more risk, and learn as much as you can from others. Be as curious as you can. I think that's where we all grow, and we all get better when we do that.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.